All right, how's it going, everybody? It's episode 239 of Catfish on Ice. Being joined by Kyle Pereira, NHL draft scout, and also covers the Tampa Bay Lightning. He's back on the show. Kyle, how have you been, man?
I'm good. It's been a little while. I'm glad to be back on.
And we've got you on at the perfect time. We haven't dove into the draft too much yet on Catfish on Ice. We wanted to wait till we could get you back on and get your expertise back on. So here's what we're doing today for Catfish on Ice episode 239, brought to you by DraftKings and also brought to you by Manscaped with our promo codes THPN. First thing we're getting into with Kyle is, of course, he is going to break down the entire Preds draft class for us, including Igor Surin, our first-round pick, a 22nd overall. Really going to get his thoughts on the strengths and weaknesses of some of the Preds' top prospects that they just drafted at the 2024 draft. Since Kyle covers the Tampa Bay Lightning, I really want to get his thoughts from his perspective covering the Lightning on the Steven Stamkos fallout. It's all people can talk about, Kyle, here in Nashville, as you can imagine.
Yeah, it's a big deal for sure.
I mean, I would argue, other than when they went to the Stanley Cup final, this has been one of the most exciting days in Preds history, just signing a player of that magnitude. But we're going to get into it more because I want to really get the thoughts from the Lightning's perspective, what that means for them moving forward. I want to talk about the GM and did he really screw this up, not getting Stamkos re-signed? Also, we are going to get into the winners and losers of free agency. I'm going to pick Kyle's brain on that. What does he think about all the teams and what they did in free agency, even though the Preds really did seem to steal the show on free agency day. They stole all the headlines. We want to look at some other teams and what they did in free agency. And then finally, we're going to wrap it up with Kyle here. We're going to go back to the 2023 draft picks and some players, some prospects that he thinks are really going to take a big step forward in the NHL coming up in 2024-25. So that's what we got in store for you today on Catfish on Ice. So first of all, Kyle, let's get it started here with the Preds' first draft pick in the first round, and that is 22nd overall pick, Igor Surin, Russian junior prospect. Give us your thoughts, strengths and weaknesses on Surin.
Yeah, so Surin's an interesting one. I know covering at FC Hockey, I didn't watch a whole lot of the Euro guys. I did obviously catch Surin. He's a top guy, so my eyes were on him. But I definitely leaned a little bit onto the Euro guys for FC who got more viewings on him. And the consensus was they thought he was more of like an early second round, mid-second round pick, which it's not exactly a big, I wouldn't say it's a reach for the Predators. I think this draft class is a bit weird with, I would say, like prospects ranked 15th to 50th were all pretty much jumbled and all over the place. But again, from my own viewings and from what the guys I talked to said, he's a really good playmaking winger. He plays very poised with the puck. He plays physical, but not overly physical where he's going to be taking a bunch of penalties. But he plays a little bit of that sandpaper where he'll get to the dirty areas. He'll forecheck hard, and he'll play with a little bit of that physicality that you will know works in the playoffs, right? We talk about it all the time. At the trade deadline, can they get playoff caliber guys? Some physical guys like Yanni Gourde, Blake Coleman for Tampa fans. They were a big reason why we won the cup back to back because of their physical play and their ability to play in those dirty areas. Serene's one of those guys that can do that as well. He's just a very smart player, really good playmaker. And again, like I said, physical. So when it comes to translating that to the NHL level, that those physical traits, if he can continue to mature, continue to bulk up, maybe grow a little bit, that's huge for the NHL level. That he screams middle six winger with some playmaking upside, especially if down the line, if he can get to the NHL within the next 4 years and somehow manages to play with Steven Stamkos, that could be the perfect match for a year, maybe two, depending how long again it takes him to translate. Yeah. Because Stamkos is that goal scorer, veteran leader. He can be a really good mentor for Surin and be that sort of yin and yang where Surin can set him up and Stamkos could be the finisher if they're put together, which is just one potential combination down the road for Nashville.
Yeah, and looking at Surin, the first thing I really saw was the quote where he said, "When can I start hitting people?" Or who can I go out there and hit? So he fits the Predators system perfectly in that regard because that's how this team plays. This is Barry Trotz's mantra, is he wants to be a very annoying team to play against. And that's kind of another word I'm seeing used about Saren a lot, is he is just a really annoying player to play against for the other team.
Yeah, yeah, and again, it comes down to if you can translate that to a higher level. There can be sometimes where a power forward isn't able to translate that power aspect, but I think one of the biggest things for him is, again, just continue to bulk up and improve the skating a little bit. That's been one of the main worries in his game, is he's not exactly the best skater, but over the years I've learned to kind of temper that, because skating is one of the easiest things you can fix as a prospect when you're being trained by NHL level coaches. So it's not a big concern, but it is something that should be on the Predators, player development staff. That should be on their radar to improve skating and continue to bulk up.
And as you also just said, Kyle, also this draft class didn't seem nearly as deep as the 2023 draft class. So once you fell all the way back to the 22nd pick, you're going to have to naturally take some chances, take some guys who have both their strengths and their weaknesses, and just hope that maybe you can kind of get a steal in the draft. It's really hard when you're picking around 22 and later in the first round.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's once you start, the Predators made the playoffs last year, and then you have some other, top teams like Toronto, Tampa. You see it with Washington right now, Pittsburgh as well. Their prospect pool is depleted because, now once you start competing, it's harder to get those prospects at the top of the draft because you're not picking at the top. And in most cases, you're trading away those picks. So for Nashville to get Surin again, to me, Surin was more of a second round guy. I understand the pick, late first, just outside the top 20. It's not a reach, especially if he can improve his skating. He could be, a key player for the Predators, especially down the road, and playoff games potentially. So it's a good swing, a worthwhile swing, especially in the draft that, again, kind of muddy in the middle there with, one guy who could be ranked, I don't know, 80th on my list could also be taken 30th overall. So, it was a weird draft. But Cern's not a bad bet at all for the Predators, especially with his style and the upside that he has as a playmaker as well. So it's a good pick for Nashville.
All right, awesome. So let's move along here with the Preds draft class. They had their second round pick, 55th overall, and I'm a lot more actually excited about this pick, and let's see what you think about it. Kyle, you actually joined the chat a couple episodes ago, and I think you kind of gave us a window into your thoughts on Teddy Stiga, U.S. development team, national team. I like Teddy Stiga a lot. I like his shot. What I really like about Stiga is his ability, seems like, to make everyone around him better as a distributor. So tell us your strengths and weaknesses and what you think about Teddy Stiga going at that point in the draft in the second round.
Yeah, he's got a lot of puck skill. You mentioned his shot, which is another thing that I really liked in this game this past season. The issue that I have with his shot, though, is he doesn't use it super often. I'd love to see him use his shot a lot more. He's definitely more of a pass first guy, which, again, I mean, he's a good distributor. He's got a good sense of passing skill, good timing with his passes. He's good at finding guys in high danger areas and looking in those areas. He's also very smart, so he's not going to force a lot of passes either. But the biggest, trait that he has is his forechecking, backchecking, just overall his engine there, his motor. I don't think you'd be very hard pressed to find a game where Stiga's not moving his feet for more than 5 seconds. Like it's very hard to catch that guy kind of at a standstill. The only time he stops is when he's on the bench taking a break, waiting for his next shift. The guy's always moving, and for me, like, I wasn't super high on Stiga. I'm not gonna lie. 55th overall, that's a good spot for him. There was a lot of debate with the FC hockey guys. They had him in the first round, and I think I had him in my early third. I can't remember. I think it was like around 70th overall. But talking to those guys, I thought to myself, if he's taken in the second round, that's a good spot for him. I also said coming into the draft, he feels like a Bruin. And I wouldn't be surprised if the Bruins take him at the tail end of the first round with their pick, which obviously didn't happen. He was able to go to the second round, and the Predators got him. I think that's a good spot for him at 55th. But the reason I wasn't super high on him is there's a couple things that I look at in prospects that I say, if they have this, then I'm going to be high on them. If they have this, I'm going to be high on them. If they have this, I might not be so high on them, or I might question the translatability of it. For me, it's hockey IQ and how to measure it, and his ability away from the puck, how he can impact plays. He's not terrible defensively. He's not that bad defensively. He's got a lot of energy, but he's very unorganized defensively. He could be drawn out of position. Transitionally, he could cheat up ice sometimes. Might not be the most impactful when it comes to transitioning the puck up ice because he's not really putting himself in the best spots to receive a pass, to gain the offensive zone, and to impact the game that way. And then in the offensive zone, yeah, he's a good playmaker. He's got a good shot when he decides to use it. He could be a good goal scorer there. But again, away from the puck, he's not putting himself in the best spots. Yes, he's always moving his feet. It can be hard to track if you're an opposing defenseman because of how often he moves. But he's not real. There's no real organization to his game, and so I question a little bit his hockey IQ, which could be, a bit of a red flag for me personally. But if he can really slow his game down, reel that part in, he's certainly an intelligent player from the way he passes the puck. So it's clear he has, a high hockey IQ with the puck on his stick. So if he can just transfer that over to when he's away from the puck and be a little bit smarter with positioning, there could be some really, really good potential there with Stiga. But for me right now, I look at him as more of like a third line energy guy that has some, playmaking upside. Could maybe play in the second power play unit down the line, but should be more used as like like a Yanni Gord type, Blake Coleman type, where it's high energy and he can bring the occasional offense, but is more used for those, forechecking, back checking situations.
So it sounds to me like Stiga, what you would expect with the second round pick, has a lot more development to do than maybe Igor Surin does.
Yeah, I mean, you look at Surin, he's more of that physical, again, that power forward type. Uh, with some skill there. Like he's more translatable to the NHL level because of his smarts and his physical abilities and how he's able to impact the game physically. Whereas Stiga's a little bit smaller. He's one of two guys that are under 6 foot that the Predators drafted in this class. So he's one of the smaller picks that the Predators made this season or this past draft, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
And so the translatability again of his high motor skills, it comes down to physical ability too, because if you can't impact the game physically when you're that high motor guy on the forecheck constantly, you might not be as efficient as you would be if you had that physical ability. So for CERN, it's a little bit more translatable. He'll have an easier time dealing with the physicality of the NHL, whereas Stiga, especially with his play style, might have a little bit more of a difficult time translating a skill. But if you can, there's some really good potential there with Stiga.
All right, let's move down the draft class here with Kyle Pereira, scout for FC Hockey and also covers the Tampa Bay Lightning. So I found it really interesting that the Predators only drafted one defenseman in their draft class, which is a far cry different than what they used to do, which is draft heavily on defensemen. But they do take a defenseman in the third round. What do you think about the third round pick, Viggo Gustafsson? If I'm pronouncing his name right, please correct me on any of these names. But what do you think about this defenseman? I haven't really gotten a chance to look too deep into his scouting report, so I'd love to hear from you on that one.
Yeah, so this is a player that I didn't have on my radar personally. He's a later mid-round pick. I believe it was fourth round, right?
Third round.
Third round. So yeah, I didn't get the chance to see a lot of the Euro guys that went third round and later. So I did have to dig a little bit, talk to some guys, but what I heard, he's very translatable to the NHL level, which for a third round pick, that's a huge positive. How well he translates and what role he'll play is a completely different story. But he's a defense first guy. He's got some good transitional skills. Again, from what I heard, I'm not speaking for myself here. Like I said, I didn't get a chance to watch him. But digging into his game, yeah, he plays a defense first style. Really good transitionally with his stretch passes. He's got some flashy skill there, which again with guys like Philip Forsberg, guys like Stamkos now, of course, Jonathan Marchessault signed as well with the Predators. When you have forwards who can impact the game at a high level but might need a little bit more help transitionally in the form of Stamkos, that's a defense that can really help those breakout passes from the back end to really stretch the ice. That's what he can bring to the table. And for Gustafsson, the main issue with him, or the main question I should say with him, is what is his upside really? He doesn't bring a whole lot offensively. He's not super involved. And transitionally, he has those occasional stretch passes, but he doesn't skate it out often. He's not the guy that's going to be leaned on as a puck mover the way that Roman Josi is in Nashville. He's more of a steady kind of take what's in front of him type first, with the ability to stretch the ice if he's given the chance to. So from everything I've seen, he looks more as like a depth defenseman, maybe like an AHL guy that comes up for covering injuries, maybe a seventh defenseman who rotates in and out of the lineup. But the main issue with him, again, similar to Surin, is his skating. He struggles against the rush, against faster skaters. He can be late coming out of his hip transitions, which is going from skating backwards to popping out and skating forwards to stick with a forward coming into the offensive zone. So you can have issues with faster skaters. That's something he's going to have to work on. Backward skating, something he's going to have to work on. Those edges in moments where he has to switch from backwards to forwards or vice versa. He's going to have to work on those transitions a little bit. And then, of course, offensively, if he wants to, have a little bit more upside, he's got to be more confident with his offensive skills, step into the play more often, take more shots, and be a little bit more risky with passes. But right now, he's just very take what's in front of him, D to D passes, maybe play it down along the boards to the winger on the outside. He doesn't really push the pace much offensively, and transitionally, he's not super relied upon by his teammates at this point. So it's mostly an upside question for the defenseman that the Predators drafted, rather than a translatability thing, because he does, again, defense first, smart in his own end, poised with a puck. It's just a matter of how much upside he has at this point.
And it really kind of makes sense that the Predators aren't going heavy on defensemen in this draft, because they're pretty loaded at defensemen as it is. Even if you go into their prospect pool, they got Tanner Mollendijk down there, their 2023 draft pick that they're really, really high on. So it kind of makes sense that they only took one defenseman in this draft class, because it's no longer a huge position of need in the immediate future. But they certainly went really heavy on centers and wingers in this draft class. I mean, you look at it, it's all centers and wingers. And so let's go to the next pick. I really want to cover the goalie, though, that they took. They did take a goalie in this draft, Unicos. Of course, everything right now is focused on Yaroslav Askarov and how he is destined to be traded. So the goalie prospect pool really needs to be reset for the Predators now. So let's talk about the goalie they took. What was his name? Jakub Malota. Tell us about him.
I believe it's Jakub Malota. I'm not 100% sure.
All right.
But that's how I've heard it. And the main traits with him is he's super athletic. Like when it comes to going east-west, side to side, his pushes, very, very quick going across the crease. One-timers, he's really good at reading and reacting and getting across in time to make the save. Rebounds, if he gives up a bad one, he's very quick with recoveries. And again, that lateral movement, he's got that one locked in. That's his biggest strength. The main thing with Malata, though, and I mentioned it already, is those rebounds. He gives up a lot of rebounds. And for young goaltenders, that's common. It's not really one of those things where it's like, out of the norm of, oh, this kid, he gives up a ton of rebounds, and that's something he's going to desperately need to work on. Every goalie, especially young goalies and juniors, they struggle with that a lot. There's no question. So it's not an uncommon thing by any means. And when you look at the Russian goaltenders who have come up the ranks, a lot of Russian goaltenders. Again, I can't confirm this, but I'm sure Igor Shesterkin, Ilya Sorokin, some of the top Russian goaltenders currently in the NHL struggled with rebounds at one point when they were in their younger years. So again, it's not out of the realm of possibility that he fixes those issues and is able to translate. But yeah, it's just very, very technical, very quick, very athletic. And I think those are really important traits to have as a goaltender, especially like UC Saros is incredibly athletic, and his impact for the Predators in goals. So he has the athleticism.
Just got an 8-year contract. So yeah, apparently he's the franchise goalie that we were waiting to see.
Yeah. And that's what you need, right? UC Saros is your number one guy, and he's going to be your number one guy for the long haul. You have Yaroslav Askarov as your backup. Who knows how long, the goal is to get him signed too. He's one of the best goaltending prospects. If you trade him, then that opens up a hole.
They're trading him.
Yeah.
I would think they're trading him. I don't see a world where the Predators can hold both of those goalies and keep Askarov as a backup for too much longer past part of this upcoming season. because they're going to they're going to need him for another. They're going to have to re-sign him to his first NHL standard contract soon. So I just don't know how that would look out. I think you can get a really good trade return for him for Askarov coming up here.
Right, and for Mulata, he's not really like everything I've seen on him. He's not really projected to be a starter necessarily. He's more of a backup down the road. And that's really all the Preds need with Saros locked up for as long as he is. So that athletic ability again is super important. It's just cleaning up the rebounds, cleaning up those mental errors that he makes on occasion. His hands, like glove and blocker, when he goes down, he can drop them. He can be a bit wild with them. So he needs to be a little bit more calm with the way he moves, I guess. He can be a bit chaotic in his movements, but outside of that, again, his athletic ability going, side to side, post to post, like he's got that locked in, and he's just a super athletic goaltender, and that's something you can bank on with upside.
So overall, Kyle, how would you rate the Preds draft class just on a letter grade scale? Do you think they, being where they picked and kind of where the trajectory of their franchise right now, and they're definitely in win now mode after what they did in free agency, and we're about to get into Steven Stamkos a little bit more with you here in a second. But, do you think that they're in that position where it was kind of hard for them to have a home run draft because of the state of their franchise right now?
I mean, again, they're picking late in first, and it's one of those weird draft classes, like I had mentioned, where, there's a lot of, it's a muddy middle. I mentioned that earlier. But overall, I'd say for like a letter grade, I'd say it's a solid B. It's not the best draft because you're not getting any of the top guys. But I think they did a really good job with their picks overall. They got their defenseman who is translatable, could be a depth guy down the line if everything goes well and moves smoothly. Maybe you have something a little bit more with him if he opens up his offensive game and his transitional abilities a little bit more. With Mulata, you have a potential backup goaltender of the future who has really good athletic abilities. And maybe, again, with some maturity and improvements in his technical abilities with his glove hand blocker going down and those movements being less chaotic, maybe you have a little bit more than just a backup goalie with Mulata down the line. Goalies are weird, so it's hard to really project them. So we'll see on that, but he has the athletic ability, so there could be some, potential home run potential with him if he can take big strides moving forward. And then I think they did a really good job with a couple of their picks in Hiroki Gosek and Miguel Marcus, our two guys. I know Gosek was a late riser, and I think, getting taken in the fourth round. I saw some people saying he could go in third or even second round because of the way he finished his year.
Nice.
And Miguel Marcus was in my top 32 prospects, and they got him in the fourth round as well. I think that was a really, really good pick. He has some red flags in his game in terms of translatability, but I think there's a really good chance he could be a middle six forward down the line for Nashville. I thought that was a very savvy pick. One with a little bit of risk, but in the fourth round, how much risk are you really taking? You know what I mean? It's not, a first round pick that you're using on him. So, but yeah, I thought that was a savvy pick by Nashville. And if it works out for them, they have a really valuable player now for their lineup. So I think that was two very smart picks there for the Predators.
Yeah, I mean, you really look at their draft class, they did most of their damage in the third round. They had a lot of picks jumbled up in the third round. They went from 70, they had a 77, an 87th pick, a 94th pick, a 99th pick. So they had 4 picks really close together. That's really where they had to find some diamonds in the rough, if you will. So let's move along here. Let's switch gears here completely with Kyle Pereira. I can't wait to get his thoughts on this because he covers the Tampa Bay Lightning. And that is, first of all, is everyone okay down there? Are those Lightning fans? Are they in there? I live in St. Pete, so I guess I shouldn't have to ask you. But
yeah, I mean, I would say there's a lot of division right now because there's the faction of fans that say, it stinks. There's no doubt about it. But his 5-on-5 play is declining. He signed, $8 million contract with Nashville. Tampa wasn't going to pay that. It's all in all, we got Jake Gensel for him. He's, theoretically on ice, an upgrade on Stamkos. He's younger as well. So there's that faction of fans that say it's not that bad. It stinks, but it's not that bad. And then there's another faction of Lightning fans.
The sky is falling.
Yeah, not necessarily the sky is falling, I would say, because I think we still have Kucherov, we still have Point, we still have Vasilevsky, Hedman.
Mhm.
I think it's more so they want Julian Brisebois fired. That they're calling for his head now. Get him out of here. We need someone who will, respect the players essentially. So there's a lot of disgruntled fans in terms of like belief in our management staff in Tampa. So that's how fans are feeling right now, and it's understandable. But I think it all comes down to this, like this season. If the Lightning miss the playoffs, then I think those rational fans that said Gensel's
Mhm.
theoretically an upgrade on ice, they miss the playoffs, they're going to switch over. And that could be the fall of Julien Brisebois. It could be the fall of John Cooper, even. Um, you know, Potentially, if Brisebois out, a new GM comes in, that could be the end of the John Cooper era in Tampa, which would be heartbreaking, even more
Yeah.
so for fans. So I think this season is a monumental one for Tampa and specifically Julien Brisebois. I would say that's how we're feeling right now. That's where we're
That
at.
makes
It,
sense.
it
It's a
comes up
really
to this
rational
season.
response from you, Kyle. Really rational. Um, but when you really think about it, and you really get over the emotional loss of a player like Steven Stamkos, um, the Lightning are still a really quality Eastern Conference team. Am I going to call them the same team they were a couple years ago when they were? I wouldn't call them there, but they're still a playoff team. I still think they're a mid 90-point team. I like what
Yeah,
they did by getting Yensel. I like, and you just mentioned it. Let's not forget all of the core players that the Lightning still have. I think the biggest question is how much was Stamkos benefiting from playing with all those players, or how much were the Lightning benefiting from having Stamkos? We're going to figure out real fast when we see what Stamkos can do now with a completely new team. He doesn't have a Nikita Kucherov playing with him anymore. We don't even know exactly where Stamkos is going to be in the lineup, but everyone seems to think he's going to be on a second line wing for the Predators, because the Predators really don't want to mess with their top line that was so productive last year. But we really have no way of knowing where Stamkos is going to be. Do you think he makes more sense as a winger at this point in his career for the Predators than playing center?
Yeah, I mean, other than times where he's played like spot center or guys got kicked out of the draw and he's going to take it, he hasn't played much center the last
Yeah.
few years with Tampa.
Mhm.
I would even say stretching to the first cup where he was out and injured. That was when Sorelli kind of bumped up into the second line center spot. You had Braden Point taking over first line duties there. And I think ever since the 2020, the first cup there in 2020, I think Stamkos has played wing primarily. So it's been, a few seasons since Stamkos has played the center role, other than again some mop-up duties or the occasional face-offs and stuff like that. I think he's capable of playing center still, um, but I would say like his 5-on-5 impact has dwindled. His skating isn't what it used to be. Of course, all the injuries he's dealt with in the past, as well as just being older. So that's kind of had a decline. His defensive game has declined a little bit as well. So when you look at it from that perspective, is Stamkos still capable of playing center? Yes. Is that the best spot to put him? Probably not. I'd say he's most efficient playing that wing,
And
which again,
having
I think
and,
that
and he needs a center that's going to that this is this question that the Predators are facing right now is they don't know who is going to step up and play that second line center role that's ready to take on that kind of pressure playing with Stamkos, and also Jonathan Marchessault figures to fit in on the other wing on that second line. That's what a lot of people are projecting. And we've got Tommy Novak, who is still a very young player. And he seems like the first option, but you're talking about Stamkos. He's going to be playing with a very young player in Tommy Novak, most likely. The Preds don't have a lot of viable options that can play that center role with Stamkos. And so for me, that's the biggest question mark that the Predators are going to really have to figure out, not only in training camp and preseason, but it's probably going to take them 10 to 15 games maybe to iron out all the kinks and figure out exactly where Stamkos is best. And that's kind of what has me just a little bit nervous when it comes to that. It could get off to a rocky start.
Yeah, I mean, for Stamkos, he's played a lot with Point as his center, and he's also had games playing with Sorelli as his center. Which on one hand, you have Point, who's just a dominant offensive presence, 40 goal scorer in his career. Obviously, Kucherov's on the wing too. Point and Kucherov have been largely inseparable over the years. for the Lightning. So when he's playing with that kind of talent offensively, his offensive numbers are going to go up. And then you have, Cirelli, who can handle the defensive side of things, which takes a little bit of weight off Stamkos' shoulders, and he's able to focus more offensively. So that gives him a little bit more breathing room to play a bit more open. And then you also have Hagel, or Duclair towards the end of the season playing on the wing, who's another good offensive presence. So yeah, Stamkos has been, I wouldn't say reliant on, when he's played with Cirelli or Hagel and depending on who the wing was, Duclair or Hagel. I wouldn't say he's been reliant on those guys. I wouldn't necessarily say that he's been carried by them. But when he's played on the top line with Kucherov and Point, I mean, you can put me on Kucherov and Point's wing, and I feel like I'd still get a couple points, in a game.
Yeah.
So I'd have a good chance of scoring. So, but yeah, it's tough to measure really the impact those guys had. But I think the bigger concern for Nashville is, well, it's a blessing and a curse, and it's Stamkos on the power play because that covered up a lot of the warts he had in his game too. Because I think he scored 50% of his goals on the power play, 50% 5-on-5. So it's like an even split, almost a dead even split down the middle of where he scored his goals and where he scored his points. And on the power play, he's playing with Hedman at the point or Sergachev because Sergachev and Hedman kind of flipped, but it doesn't matter. They're both great in the offensive zone. And then you have Point in the mid slot, a big body, whether it's Tanner Jeannot or Nick Paul or Anthony Cirelli at net front. Then you have Kucherov on the wing. And when you have that loaded of a power play, and Stamkos has that big weapon of a shot, it's going to mask a lot of your deficiencies at 5-on-5 because you're going to be scoring, and it's going to reflect on your points and your production. So I think the bigger question mark is just how bad is his 5-on-5 play, and how much was he relying on Kucherov and Point when he played with them 5-on-5? I think that's a question that the Predators need answers to. And, I'm going to support Stamkos 100%. He's one of my all-time favorite players. But that's definitely a question that needs to be asked and needs to be answered quickly is, can he still be that guy for the Predators that's going to scare opponents, or is he going to see, a massive decline without Kucherov, without Point, and without that power play? That's huge. That's a huge question that needs to be answered.
So Stamkos, he shared it on his. He doesn't post a lot on Twitter, by the way. But of course, when it's something like this, you got to put it out there. And so Steven Stamkos put out on his Twitter account, "Thank you, Tampa. I don't have the words yet. I will soon. It's still too early to process. Just wanted everyone to know how thankful we are for 16 years as a Bolt. My family and I are excited for the next chapter." And he's also already posted his two young boys in Predators uniforms. So I'm sure that was a dagger in the heart for a lot of Lightning fans as well. But I will say, I think a lot of Lightning fans are not going to have a hard time at all cheering for Stamkos in a Predators uniform because you're not talking about two rivals. He's in the Western Conference. I don't think it's going to be incredibly hard to still keep cheering for Stamkos, even though he's playing for Nashville now.
Yeah, not at all. Not at all.
But I love your point you bring up about the 5-on-5 because I think the top two reasons, it shouldn't be the only two reasons, but I think the top two reasons that Barry Trotz went out and got Stamkos is he has shown as 2 years of being GM so far, or he's going into his second year, that he values very highly championship pedigree veterans. And he already started doing that last offseason with Ryan O'Reilly and Luke Shen and players like that. But now he goes out and just really just swings for the fences and gets Jonathan Marchessault, who's a Conn Smythe winner. And then he gets Steven Stamkos. And so I think number one, he's just looking for those intangibles from Stamkos, that championship pedigree, because Trotz still very much believes in his next wave of young players that are on this team, like Luke Evangelista and Tommy Novak and guys like that. So he wants to see those guys be elevated. Philip Tomasino, Juuso Parsman. So those types of guys. But number two, really what the Predators are going to need out of Stamkos more than anything is to stay a lethal weapon on the power play. The Predators' power play was peaks and valleys last year. It wasn't trustworthy at all. And, of course, when you needed it the most in the first round of the playoffs against the Canucks, I think it went like 2 for 22 or something crazy like that. And so that's what you're hoping for Stamkos more than anything. The 5-on-5 play, maybe you can overlook it a little bit if it's not as crisp and as good as you want, as long as he's feasting on the power play. That's what you really need.
Yeah, and I think, again, it comes down to who he's put with. Is he going to be on the number one power play? I would assume so. And so if he's playing with guys like Forsberg, O'Reilly, Marchessault, Yossi at the point, yeah,
Yes.
I think it'll be easier to transition to the Predators with Yossi at the point because that's going to be similar to a Hedman at the point.
Yeah.
And then Forsberg, I don't know, I'm not too familiar with like the power play setup, but Forsberg, Marchessault, Ryan O'Reilly could be that net front guy. It might not be too unfamiliar for him with some of the guys he has the chance to play with on the power play. So I think he still has that, and he still has a powerful shot. And Yossi alone, if he can find Stamkos in his office, as they say,
He will. Pretty
I think
confident.
I think he'll be fine on the power play. I don't think it'll be nearly as efficient as what it was with Tampa this past season, which Tampa had like a historical power play like that. That power play is the reason they made the playoffs, in my opinion. It won't be that sort of efficiency, but he's still going to be a very effective weapon for the Predators on that power play.
Early on, what I'm looking like for the Predators power play, and again, I'm not even trying to put it on the same stratosphere as what the Lightning had, but it still looks really, really lethal. We're leaving out Ryan O'Reilly, who did a lot of his damage on the power play last year. He likes to get in the grill of the goalie and look for those rebounds and look for those sloppy pucks loose in the crease. And so you're looking at, if you can get Yossi, Stamkos, O'Reilly, Forsberg, and that fifth spot still to be determined. I would almost rather have Marchessault on the second power play unit, because that's the unit that really needs a lot of help, and I'm going to need someone like him. So that fifth spot's very much up for grabs in terms of who you put on the top unit of the Preds power play. But those four guys alone, I think Stamkos is going to have plenty of room to still operate. I don't think, and it's going to really, if anything, Stamkos can finally be kind of a decoy, if you will, to help out Forsberg, who we know he just had the best goal scoring season of his career. So we know that Forsberg can feast off the opportunities if he finds more open areas on the power play due to the penalty kill being so honed in on Stamkos. And then, of course, you've got Yossi, who can just blast a shot from the point and just stun the goalie with his crazy accuracy. So I think the Preds power play definitely is going to be, if they're not top 10, even maybe top 5 in the league, it's going to be a big disappointment. There's no excuses for this Preds power play to not be the top strength of this team, much like some of your other best teams in the league usually have. So that's what I'm excited about. All right, let's move along here with Kyle. Let's talk about winners and losers of free agency. So the way I did this is I did 3 teams from each category. And Kyle, I'm putting my bias aside, I swear, but I got to put the Preds as winners just based on what they did. I know the long-term outlook of some of these contracts could come back and bite them where the sun doesn't shine, but at least in the early portion of these contracts, which is what you're banking on, the Preds look like winners. We'll revisit it a couple years down the road and see, oh my gosh, the Predators, like the Brady Shea contract has me a little, like 7 years. It's a lot of time. I wasn't so sure about the term of that contract, but in the early going, at least, come on. I mean, the Predators just flipped their entire roster, basically, the top part of their roster. But I would call them winners. I'm going to say the Devils are winners, just going out there and getting Brett Pesce. I mean, he was also being linked to the Predators for a while there, but Brett Pesce is a big move for them. They were a huge disappointment by missing the playoffs. And then I went ahead and put the Kraken as winners because I really love Brandon Montour. And the fact that they got Brandon Montour and they also got Chandler Stevenson from the Knights. So I think the Kraken are – who are some of your winners for free agency?
So I also had 3. Nashville, of course. I mean, I think everyone's in agreement that Nashville won at least for this season. Stamkos is a massive culture builder from Tampa who can help, on ice, off ice with the Predators. Shea, even though it's not a great contract, he's still a very efficient defenseman. And then, of course, Marchessault from Vegas. Those Stamkos and Marchessault as well won the Stanley Cup. So those are proven winners. They'll help the Predators in the now. Hopefully the contracts age a little bit better for them. That'll be huge, deciphering whether they won in the long run or not. But in the now, they're definitely the big winners of free agency. And the other teams I had were Utah and Chicago. So for Utah, I mean, not so much free agency signings, but the free agency period, going out, getting Sergachev, getting John Marino, signing Ian Cole, completely reshaped that entire defense. Sergachev can be their number one moving forward. You have John Marino, who's more of a shutdown guy. Lost my train of thought there. I apologize. And then Cole. Cole is a really good defensive first defenseman. Very smart player. I remember when he played with Tampa, he actually did a really good job of sort of stabilizing the bottom pair while he's in. Not a lot of Lightning fans will agree. I know he wasn't the most well-liked defenseman with Tampa, but when I watched and tracked the stats myself, I saw Cole was still an efficient defenseman, as much as people didn't really like him. So I think that was a pretty smart signing by Utah as well, especially some familiarity there for Sergachev, a guy that he's played with in the past. And then for Chicago, it's probably not going to get them into the playoffs. Definitely not. They're still, one of the bottom teams in the league. But I think for what they're going for, Connor Bedard had a great year. Won the Calder Trophy. We all know how efficient he is. Great player, has the potential to be one of the game wreckers up there in the upper echelons with McDavid, Kucherov, Matthews, like one of those high-end players that turns a franchise around. Like that's what Connor Bedard is. But their goal for the offseason was to surround him with better players, better forwards, better wingers, everything you can find to just plug in with him and help him not be the only guy carrying the weight. And so getting, Tyler Bertuzzi, Teuvo Teravainen, Ilya Mikheyev, who's not the most efficient player, but is fast, plays with a fast pace, can be one of those middle six guys that adds a little bit more depth so that at least the Blackhawks aren't incompetent when Bedard's off the ice. And then Martinez is a really steady defenseman on the back end as well to help Kevin Korchinski a little bit. So I think with what they're trying to do, with what they're trying to accomplish with some of their younger players, I think those are really smart signings by Chicago.
Yeah, you have to forgive me. You're right. The Chicago Blackhawks they should be considered winners in free agency, but just the Predators fan coming out in me, I can never call the Blackhawks winners in anything. So So I just couldn't do it. I couldn't bring myself to do it. I'm sorry, but you make an intriguing case. They did do a lot to. I mean, they have nowhere to go but up. I mean, we talked about that in the last episode. But they shouldn't be a doormat at least next year. I think they'll actually be maybe a 70-something point team. Losers in free agency. So when I look at like a lot of what happened in free agency, I didn't see any teams really make any major moves. That is like a lot of the teams that were quiet on free agency, they were already so good as it is, and they already have elite cores at the top of their roster that it was kind of like they didn't really have to do a whole lot. Like I think about teams like the Avalanche, they didn't have to do a whole lot. The Florida Panthers, at least they held on to some of their own players. They're going to be back next year. But I do look at the Maple Leafs as being losers. I just don't like the Chris Tanev signing at all, that kind of length of a contract. I know he's a rugged player and he can do some great things for you in the playoffs and such, but do not like that contract. I don't think the Maple Leafs did much of anything to make themselves any more than just another team that's probably destined to be disappointed in the playoffs again. I don't know. I just think they're losers in free agency so far.
Yeah, for me, I picked three teams here.
I got two more as well, but give me some of yours first.
Yeah, so for me, I think the worst. I was tempted to put Tampa in this list, but I landed on Winnipeg. They lost Toffoli, they lost Monahan, they lost Brendan Dillon, they lost Nate Schmidt, two defensemen, two forwards, two top six forwards as well.
Yeah.
And the only piece they added was Kaapo Kähkönen, who's not exactly a very great goaltender, in my opinion. He doesn't really move the needle for them. So that was a very not a good offseason.
It looks like, Kyle, that's a good one there. And it looks really like Winnipeg's going to once again have to heavily rely on Connor Hellebuck.
Religiously.
Yeah. And, Hellebuck got exposed in the playoffs. And he wasn't the only one. It was kind of a bad postseason experience for a couple of the top-tier goalies. Shesterkin didn't look that great either. But Yeah, that's a good one with Winnipeg, man. That might be one of the when you just list off with the losses they had and they didn't do anything to replace it. It's pretty bad. Talking about a team that finished second, that rallied to finish second in the Central Division, but then they go out in 5 to Colorado. That was a brutal series early on. A couple of those games really could have flipped to Winnipeg's favor. But yeah, if you're a Winnipeg fan right now, you're feeling pretty underwhelmed with what your team did in free agency.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other two teams I had were Vegas and Dallas, which, you mentioned the Avalanche. They didn't have to do much. Panthers didn't have to do much. You could argue Dallas didn't have to do much either. But they lost Pavelski. He retired, which is a pretty big loss on the ice and off the ice, similar to the Steven Stamkos situation in Tampa. And then you have Chris Tanev, who he's not, a world beater anymore. You mentioned Toronto as one of the losers. You don't like the Tanev contract. So it's not like Tanev's this crazy, top of the line defenseman anymore, but he provided.
And at the same time, you went out to get him at the trade deadline, and then you just lose him for nothing. That seems like almost like a waste of time that they even went out and got him in the first place.
That and, Suter, good veteran defensive presence, and Yanni Hakanpää, who's a good depth defenseman. They lose some depth there on the back end with 3 defensemen leaving. And they signed Colin Blackwell, who's a bottom 6 center. He's not really going to push the needle. Matt Dumba, which I can say from a Lightning fan perspective, that is not a good signing.
I really wanted to get your thoughts on that one. What's he getting? $3.75 million? Is that what? Yeah. 2 years, $3.75 million per year. That's just. I haven't come across one Stars fan on social media that likes that signing.
No. And again, like I said, from a Lightning perspective, I remember when they first traded for him. I made the joke of, well, the Syracuse Crunch could use some defensemen, I guess. Like that was my argument for the Dumba trade.
Oh, man.
I like it. Dumba's not, he's good in the locker room. He's a good character guy, but he is not anywhere near what he used to be. And his defensive game is just not good at all. And that's something that Dallas is going to be kicking themselves.
I got Stars on my list of losers as well. I got the Stars on my list of losers as well. But they're still so good. Even being losers in free agency, they're still one of my top Stanley Cup contenders again going into next year. Because their core is just so good and their window is so wide open. Their roster,
drafting.
Yeah, they're drafting well. They got a good prospect pool. Like their front office should be praised so heavily for what they've built over the last 5 years. We all saw the Stars coming from a Nashville perspective when they knocked us out of the first round in 2019, and that was kind of the beginning of the end of David Poile finally bowing out as the GM of the Predators. Is that 2019 first round upset against the Stars? That's kind of when they started arriving, and now you just look at some of these young players that have just continued to get better. With Miro Heiskanen leading the way, but with Jason Robertson and just Miro, and Heiskanen's a trendy pick to win the Norris next year. You've got Jake Ottinger, who he's still a very streaky goalie, but he is absolutely capable of being a franchise goalie and a Vezina winner eventually. So they got the formula. So they didn't, even though they're losers in free agency, I'm not saying that they're still going to have an outstanding year most likely. So they didn't have to be winners free agency, but you would have liked to see them do a little bit more. And then my other loser that you didn't mention, Kyle, is I put the Sabres on here because this poor franchise just can't end their playoff drought to save their lives. And everyone keeps saying, oh, they're coming. They're on their way. They're one of the good young rising teams. And that could still be true, but I would have thought they would have made some more moves. I didn't study their cap situation religiously, so maybe you can correct me on that if you know, Kyle. But they didn't do much. They went out and get a former Pred player, Jason Zucker, and I'm like, really? That's what you go get? That's your crown addition of the offseason. No offense to Jason Zucker, but he's not going to move the needle much for them, I don't think. He'll help them a little bit as a veteran, but I got the Sabres on there. I would have thought they would have tried to make a couple bigger moves to really put them over the top and be a playoff contender or be a viable playoff team this season in their playoff drought.
Yeah, the Sabres, I think they're going to be relying big time on Zach Benson taking another step. Some of their other young guys taking big steps, which it's not going to get them into the playoffs, especially with Detroit being as good as they are and the rest of the Atlantic. Montreal's trending in the right direction. The Bruins are still the Bruins. Like they're still going to be competing for a playoff spot. The Lightning are still going to be competing for a playoff spot. The Leafs are still the Leafs. Like,
It's deep. The Eastern Conference
yeah,
is so deep.
yeah. So they definitely didn't do enough. But the other loser I had was Vegas on my list. They added Holtz, which Holtz is a good goal scorer they got from New Jersey. That's a potential big swing for them. Victor Olofsson is another, guy who can score, but more of like a middle six scorer, depth scorer. Don't think that's a big addition. And then Samsonov he's not coming off the best year of his career, as we all know. And in return, they get those guys. They lose Logan Thompson, which Samsonov and Logan Thompson, I guess, is kind of a wash. I think Thompson's a little bit better of a goaltender, though, in my personal opinion. So I think overall it's a bit of a wash, but I'd say Vegas doesn't really lose too much there. But they replace William Carrier, Chandler Stevenson, Anthony Mantha, and Jonathan Marchessault with Alex Holtz and Victor Olofsson.
Mm.
That's not nearly enough to plug up the holes that you just lost. And they've the Vegas Golden Knights, there's always something up their sleeve. They're always making trades. They're always going for the big fish. Jack Eichel, Mark Stone, Alex Petrangelo, um, and it's finally starting to rear its ugly head with the cap space. Even though it's gone up, they're in a really really tough spot, and that's their reward. They lost, four really key forwards, and a goaltender who's done well for them. Over the last couple of seasons for, two forwards who may do well or may completely fizzle out, and then a goaltender who's coming off his worst year of his career. So,
Mm. Well, I'm totally okay with the downfall of Vegas. They've never experienced heartbreak. And so sorry, Vegas fans. It's time for you to get back on board with the rest of us NHL fans who know what it truly feels like
yeah.
to feel heartbreak. Join the rest of the club. All right. Let's round out episode 239 with Kyle Pereira, our special guest, NHL draft scout, and also covers the Tampa Bay Lightning. And really happy to have him back on the show. I think this is your third appearance on the show, if I'm not mistaken.
I believe so, yeah.
And then, of course, I've done the mock draft with you in the past. I couldn't join you this year. I was really let down by that. I really wanted, but you extended the invitation to me again. I really wanted to do it, but I think I would have been one of the worst GMs in history of mock drafts if I would have joined. I was not prepared. Life has gotten in the way with a lot of stuff lately, but yeah, check out. You've got it up on your YouTube channel, right? The mock draft you guys did.
Yeah, we had some technical issues, so it doesn't look the best. I have to switch back to the computer I used last time, which I still have, so it's not a big deal. But I use a different platform, and it didn't come out great. But the audio is fine. You can still hear it. You just have to kind of listen to it with the phone screen down.
Yeah.
So.
Hey, let me tell you something. I am a master of technical difficulties in the 239 episodes I've done of this podcast. So I totally get that. But all right, let's round it out here. Thanks everyone for watching today so far. And before we do that, I'm going to tell you about DraftKings. So look out for that. But let's round it out with, of course, who do we think from the 2023 draft class is about to make a major splash? And I want to talk about the first. So first of all, I want to throw this out there. From the 2023 draft class, we've got, it looks like 6 players who have made their NHL debut so far, which I found interesting. I thought maybe there would have been a little bit more. But Kyle, you know more about how long it takes for even the best prospects to make it to the NHL. It's usually not a 1-year turnaround or first year after your draft year. But you just brought up Zach Benson. Do you think he's poised to have a really big spike in his second year with Buffalo?
For the Sabres fans' hopes, yes. I mean, coming into the 2023 draft, Zach Benson was far and away my favorite prospect to watch. I know I've worked with Mitch Brown of Elite Prospects. He tracks thousands of games each year, microstats, stuff like that. And Zach Benson graded out as the best playmaker he has ever tracked. All the passing metrics, he's number one across, I think, 4 or 5 years of data. He was number one. He's still number one after 2024. Like the kid, he's super talented. He's just an unbelievable player. And despite his size limitations, I think he's definitely on my list. Before we even got into it, he's definitely on my list of three guys who I think could have a big step forward. Yeah, he's just too talented to be held back. I mean, he had a good year, 30 points in 71 games, but there's so much more under the hood there with Benson that he hasn't had the chance to show off yet. Which in Buffalo, there's not a whole lot he can do. The line mates aren't exactly the best, but if he's able to get a bigger opportunity, gets to play alongside Tage Thompson, I think there's a real possibility that he could be a premier player by the end of this season. Genuinely, that's how highly I think of Zach Benson. So
I wanted
he's
to.
definitely
If you
number one.
remember, I wanted the Predators to take him so bad. When we were all kind of talking about the leading up to the 2023 draft, but the Preds just missed out on him. If I remember, I think he went a few picks before the Predators picked. But yeah, Zach Benson's got to be number one. But let's look at some of the other guys. What about Will Smith? I want to talk to you about Will Smith. He did not make his NHL debut last year. Is he expected to be a regular NHL player for the Sharks this year?
He is, yes, and it will be interesting to see how he plays with Macklin Celebrini because I think the Sharks' plan is to put those two together. I'm not super high on Will Smith. Not because I don't think he can translate to the NHL level, but he's a very high risk, high reward player, and I don't view that as something that is super translatable to the NHL. I think it's going to lead to a lot of consistency issues. But paired with a guy like Macklin Celebrini, who's super cerebral, William Eklund's another really good young player at San Jose. There's a good chance that Will Smith can be one of those guys that really steps out and just flashes right away in the NHL. There's a good chance of that happening. I'm not a big believer. Again, I think his game is a bit too high risk to be a consistent threat throughout the year. But if you can mesh well with Celebrini, that could be a very threatening line for years to come, for sure.
And also, just to make sure everyone knows, we're talking about Will Smith, the hockey player, not Will Smith, the guy who slapped Chris Rock.
Yeah.
I don't know what Will Smith, the movie star, I don't know what his hockey skills are, but we're definitely talking about the NHL prospect here. Every time I see Will Smith, I just instantly think of that moment when he slapped Chris Rock. Or anyway, all right, let's move on. But all right, so what about let's move on. Do you think Connor Bedard has another gear that he's about? I know he's already made his big NHL splash, but we got to at least talk about it. Do you think that he is his sophomore year is going to be just big time increase?
So he was another guy that I had on my list of players who could take another big step. So I absolutely think Bedard's got another gear. The hope is that he can stay healthy this year. Obviously, he missed a few games with injury this past season, but you also have to take into consideration the additions that the Blackhawks made to the top six with Teravainen, with Bertuzzi, and I think overall he's got better line mates now than he had last year, which tells me he's going to be less of a focal point, at least not as consistently relied upon by the Blackhawks, which should give him a little bit more breathing room and a little less weight on his shoulders, which I think will do him absolute wonders. So I absolutely think like next year, if I was a betting man, and I'm not, but if I was a betting man, I would put money on Bedard being a point per game player next season. That's how highly I think of Bedard. That's how good the kid is, and I think he has that in him as soon as next year.
All right. And then another one I want to pick your brain on that hasn't made his NHL debut yet, but just is all over the superstar headlines, and that's Matt V. Michkov for the Flyers. What is his next step forward, and what's his immediate roadmap look like into 2024-25?
So Matvei Michkov was my third player on the list, but I did have like a little caveat for that. Michkov is unreal. The raw skill that he possesses, the stick handling, the playmaking, it's just dazzling. Like when it comes to raw talent, I would argue he was right up there with Bedard coming into the 2023 draft. That's how good the kid is, and just super dazzling. But you have to take into consideration he's played his whole career in Russia, and coming from the high speed game that is the KHL on a much larger ice surface, going to a much more physical game in the NHL. in a smaller ice surface, there's less room to play around with. So there's less room to stick handle. There's less room to do, some of the fancier things he's pulled off in his career thus far in the KHL and the MHL. And again, it's a lot more physical of a league in the NHL. The guys are smarter. I would say the speed is similar. I think the KHL's pace is a little bit faster than the NHL's. And that's not to say that the NHL's is slow pace or anything like that. But I think the pace is a lot more similar in the KHL to the NHL in terms of speed. But NHL players are stronger, again, more physical. There's less space to work with. They're a lot smarter. The talent is a lot higher. So Michkov might have some issues early on, but that's not my biggest concern with him. My biggest concern by far is John Tortorella. And that's not because John Tortorella is not a good coach. He's a fantastic coach.
Mm.
But he is one of those coaches that you need to go into that locker room and you need to try and put in more effort than the next guy, the guy sitting in the stall next to you. And if you're not going to go out there and provide results right away, you're going to fall down the list of players that John Tortorella has, the pecking order. And so if Matvei Michkov comes in and struggles, he's a young kid. He's never played on North American ice surfaces. He's never played in the physical element of the NHL or, how fast or smart the NHL is. Any normal player would struggle right away, right out of the gates. And I just don't think John Tortorella is going to give him a long enough leash to be able to get out of those struggles, to work out those kinks, to do what he has to do to grow. And that, again, I'm not trying to bash on John Tortorella, but his whole coaching style is you need to earn it. And if you're not going to earn it, then you're not going to play a lot. And I worry that that's going to hurt his development. I worry that that's going to hurt his ice time and his ability to grow. But if he's able to come in and make an impression right away and move up that pecking order, sky's the limit for him.
No. All right. Interesting points there. Really cannot wait to see Michkov make his NHL debut, though. It's going to be really fun to watch. All right. So this has been episode 239 of Catfish on Ice special edition with guest Kyle Pereira, draft scout, and covering the Tampa Bay Lightning. It's been a blast having you on, man.
I love talking hockey. I love coming on here, and it's always a great time.
All right. Until next time, folks, we hope you have a great weekend, and hockey is not that far away. So just enjoy this lull in the NHL calendar for a little bit, because training camp will be here before we know it. So until then, everyone take care. We appreciate all of you. Hit subscribe below if you've watched this on YouTube, and also hit follow on all of our social media accounts and interact with us. Watch our live episodes. Until then, this has been Chad Minton, your host, Catfish on Ice. Take care, everybody.